Damien Valenti didn't stop walking when he saw the body. He stopped breathing. The security light caught her first gray uniform, dark hair spread across white snow, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something that never came. His driver said her name. Damien was already moving. She wasn't moving. She wasn't making a sound, and the snow around her hands was red. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that frozen night and find out what Damien Valenti found in the snow that changed everything. The estate had been quiet since 9 o'clock. That was normal. The Valenti household ran on discipline, and discipline meant routine. The kitchen staff finished cleaning by 8:30. The groundskeepers finished their evening rounds by 9. The maids retreated to the staff quarters on the 3rd floor, and by 9:15 every light in the east wing of the mansion was off. Marcus, the head of household security, had checked in at 9:40 and reported everything secure. But Marcus had been watching the wrong direction. Damien Valenti's car turned through the iron gates at 11:53. He knew the time because he always knew the time. 30 years of building an empire had made punctuality something close to a religion for him. The business meeting in downtown Chicago had run long, but it had ended well. A real estate deal worth $11 million, a partnership that would expand his legitimate holdings into 3 new counties. His attorney had shaken his hand in the parking garage and told him it was a good night. Damien had nodded. He'd gotten into his car. He'd told his driver to take him home. He wasn't thinking about anything unusual. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. That was the thing about the moments that change your life. They never announced themselves. His driver, a quiet man named Rourke who had been with the Valenti family for 18 years, made the turn from the main driveway onto the stone path that curved around the north side of the estate. It was the longer route. Damien usually preferred the shorter route, through the front gates, but the front entrance had been getting resurfaced all week, and the construction materials were still stacked along the side. So Rourke took the north path, and Damien looked out the window. He almost didn't see her. The security lights on the north side of the estate were older than the ones near the main entrance. They gave a dimmer, yellower light, and the snow had been falling since 6 o'clock that evening, soft, thick, the kind of snow that covered everything quietly and made the world look clean when it wasn't. But something broke the surface of that clean white ground. Something that wasn't right. Damien's eyes caught it before his brain understood it. A shape near the low stone wall that separated the garden path from the outer hedge. Dark against white, too long to be a fallen branch. Too still to be anything alive. "Stop the car," he said. Rourke stopped immediately. Damien was out of the car before Rourke could reach the door handle. He walked fast across the snow. He felt the cold through his suit jacket. He didn't care about the cold. He got close enough to see the gray uniform. He got close enough to see the dark hair. He got close enough to see that the arm stretched out toward the hedge had red across the fingers, where the skin had cracked and bled from hours, not minutes, but hours of exposure to freezing temperatures. Damien dropped to one knee in the snow and put 2 fingers against her throat. A pulse, weak there, but weak. "Get Dr. Ferraro on the phone right now," he said without turning around. His voice was completely calm. That was the part that would later disturb everyone who heard the story. The most powerful man in northern Chicago was kneeling in the snow next to an unconscious maid, and he sounded like he was ordering coffee. "Tell him to get to the estate in the next 20 minutes, or he'll regret it. And wake up Marcus. Tell him to come to the North Garden path immediately." He didn't wait for Rourke to confirm. He was already sliding his arms under the woman's body. She was lighter than he expected. Much lighter. The thought landed in his chest and stayed there. She had been working inside his house for 2 years. Walking through his hallways, preparing his meals, handling his belongings, and he had never noticed how thin she was. He carried her inside through the side entrance, past 2 stunned kitchen staff members who had been finishing a late meal, and up the rear staircase to the 2nd floor. He didn't go to the staff quarters on the 3rd floor. He took her to one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor, The one closest to the main staircase, the one with the best heating, the one with the largest bed. He set her down carefully. Her face was turned slightly to the side, and for the first time, with the room's warm light above her, he could see it clearly. The bruising along her left cheekbone was not from a fall. He had been in enough fights, had seen enough injuries in his years of running the Valenti operation, to know the difference between impact bruising from a surface and impact bruising from a hand. The pattern, the shape, the distribution, all of it was wrong for an accidental fall. Someone had hit her, more than once. Marcus appeared in the doorway within 4 minutes, slightly out of breath, still buttoning his shirt. Damien looked at him, just looked at him. Marcus was a former military man. He didn't frighten easily. He had worked private security for dangerous people across 3 continents before coming to work for the Valenti family. But the look on Damien Valenti's face at that moment made him take a half-step backward without meaning to. "Tell me," Damien said quietly, "how a woman who lives and works inside this house ended up unconscious in the snow on the north path, and how your team missed it for God knows how many hours." Marcus opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Mr. Valenti, IR patrol logs show the north path was checked at 7:15 and 9:40. She's been out there for at least 3 hours, Damien said. Probably longer. Her core temperature is dangerously low. Her fingers bled through before the cold stopped the bleeding. Whatever happened to her, it did not happen 10 minutes ago." Marcus said nothing. "I want the security footage from every camera on this estate, from 4 o'clock this afternoon until right now," Damien said. "I want it in my study within the hour. I want every staff member who was on duty tonight available for questioning in the morning. And I want to know the name of every person who entered or left this property today." "Yes, sir." "And Marcus." The man paused in the doorway. "If I find out that someone on my staff knew what was happening and said nothing, I don't care how long they've been with this family. Do you understand me?" "Understood," Marcus said, and left. Dr. Ferraro arrived in 19 minutes. He was 62 years old, had been the Valenti family's private physician for over a decade, and had treated everything from gunshot wounds to the effects of deliberate poisoning without asking a single unnecessary question. He was exactly the kind of man you trusted when you needed silence more than you needed conversation. But when he finished his examination and came out of the guest room, his face said something his mouth was being careful not to say. Damien was standing in the hallway. "How is she?" he asked. "She'll survive the exposure," Ferraro said, keeping his voice low. "Her core temperature was concerning, but we've got it under control. The frostbite on her fingers is mild. She'll have sensitivity issues for a few weeks, but no permanent damage. And the rest of it?" Ferraro was quiet for a moment. "She has bruising consistent with repeated blunt force trauma," he said carefully. "Her left cheekbone, her right shoulder, her upper arm. These injuries are not all from the same event, Damien. Some of them are newer. Some of them are older, healing but not healed. This has been happening for a period of weeks, maybe longer." The hallway felt very cold for a moment. Damien said, "Weeks. At minimum." "Inside my house," Ferraro said nothing. He didn't need to. "She's sleeping now," Ferraro continued. "I've given her something mild for the pain and to help her rest. She should wake in a few hours. When she does, she's going to need warmth, food, and Damien. She's going to need to feel safe. Whoever did this to her made her feel very unsafe for a very long time. Please don't crowd her when she wakes. Please don't demand answers immediately." Damien looked at the closed door of the guest room. "I'll need to ask her what happened," he said. "I know," Ferraro said. "But not the minute she opens her eyes." Damien nodded once. Ferraro gathered his bag, hesitated at the top of the staircase, and turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "whoever found her when they did, she would not have survived another hour in those temperatures." Then he went down the stairs and left. Damien stood alone in the hallway. He pulled out his phone. He looked at it. He put it back in his pocket. Then he pulled one of the chairs from the hallway alcove and set it just outside the guest room door. And he sat down and he waited. Her name was Lillian Harper. He knew this much from staff records. He had her file pulled from the household management system. Within the hour, Marcus sent it digitally, along with a preliminary report on the security footage, which was still being reviewed. Lillian Ann Harper, 28 years old. Hired 2 years and 3 months ago through a staffing agency called Claremont Domestic Services, which specialized in placing qualified household staff with high-net-worth clients in the greater Chicago area. Her file showed a clean background check, solid references from 2 previous employers, and a note from the hiring manager that said she was quiet, thorough, and highly professional. Quiet. That was the word that kept appearing in every brief description of her. Quiet worker, quiet disposition, never any complaints from the household staff. Never any disciplinary issues. Never requested time off except for one occasion 6 months ago when she had what the records listed as a personal health matter which had lasted 3 days and been approved without comment. 3 days off 6 months ago. Damien sat in the chair outside her door and thought about that. 3 days off for a personal health matter 6 months ago. He thought about the older bruising Ferraro had described. He thought about Lillian Harper going back to work after 3 days. He thought about the household staff passing her in the hallways every day, saying good morning, asking her to bring coffee, directing her to clean this room, prepare that setting, handle those arrangements. He thought about every member of his staff walking past her every single day and not seeing it. He thought about himself walking past her and not seeing it. The file said she had worked for him for 2 years and 3 months. He could not recall a single conversation they had ever had. The security footage came through at 1:40 in the morning. Damien went to his study, sat at his desk, and watched it. The cameras on the north side of the estate were indeed older, lower resolution, than the ones near the main gates. But they were sufficient. He found what he was looking for at 5:17 in the afternoon. A man he didn't immediately recognize had been on the north path. Not in the garden itself, but on the path close to the stone wall, close to the hedge, in the area where the camera angle was worst, and the lighting was most limited. The man was in a staff uniform, dark coat over it. He appeared to know exactly where the cameras were and how to position himself within their blind spots. He was talking to someone. He was talking to Lillian Harper. The audio on the older cameras was not good enough to be useful. But the video was. Damien watched the interaction for 4 minutes. He could see Lillian's posture rigid, arms close to her body, the body language of someone who wanted to be anywhere else on earth. He could see the man moving closer when she tried to step back. He could see the moment when Lillian said something, one sentence too, and the man's expression shifted. Then the man's arm moved. Fast, Damien's jaw tightened. He rewound the footage and watched it again and again. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus, the man in the gray coat on the north path at 5:17, he said. Who is he? Marcus took 30 seconds to cross-reference. Victor Hale. Hired 8 weeks ago through the same staffing agency as he stopped. Same agency as Lillian Harper, Damien said yes. Where is Victor Hale right now? His staff ID was scanned leaving the property at 6:02 this evening. He hasn't come back. Find him, Damien said. I want to know everything about Victor Hale, who he is, who he actually works for, and why he was placed in this house. I want answers by morning. Yes, sir. And Marcus, nobody discusses this outside of the people already involved. Nobody. He ended the call. He sat at his desk in the quiet of the study and looked at the paused footage on his screen. The image showed Lillian Harper alone on the path after the man had gone. She was standing very still, not walking, not moving, just standing there in the cold, one hand pressed flat against the stone wall. Damien studied her face in the frozen frame. He had no idea what she looked like when she smiled. He had no idea what her voice sounded like when she wasn't being careful. She had been inside his house for over 2 years, and he had no idea. That realization sat in his chest like a stone. She woke up just before 4 in the morning. He heard the small sounds of movement from inside the guest room, the shift of weight on the bed, the quiet intake of breath that meant someone had just realized they were somewhere unfamiliar. He stood up from the chair and knocked softly on the door. Silence. He knocked again. Miss Harper, my name is Damien Valenti. You're in one of the guest rooms in the main house. You're safe. I just wanted you to know I'm outside if you need anything. More silence. Then a voice, thin and careful, "I know who you are." Something about the way she said it, not afraid, exactly, but Brace told him Ferraro had been right. She was waiting to find out what kind of trouble being here would mean for her. "May I come in?" he asked. A pause. Yes, he opened the door. She was sitting up against the headboard, the blankets pulled up to her chest, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Her left cheekbone was deeply bruised purple-black, swollen enough to change the shape of her face on that side. Her hands were bandaged where the skin had split. She looked at him steadily. He'd expected fear. He'd expected the same lowered eyes he got from nearly every staff member when he entered a room. What he got instead was a level, guarded gaze that told him she was watching him very carefully and making calculations he couldn't read. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Warmer," she said. "That's good." He didn't move closer. He stood near the door, giving her the room. "Dr. Ferraro said you need to rest. I'm not here to interrogate you tonight." Something shifted in her expression. "Then why are you here?" "To make sure you knew you were safe," he said, "and to tell you that you don't have to explain anything tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. "You found me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She looked down at her bandaged hands. "I thought I was just going to sleep," she said quietly. I thought that would be the end of it, and it would be quiet." She said it matter-of-factly, without drama, the way people describe things that have already passed. Damien was very still. "Is that what you wanted?" he asked carefully. "For it to be the end?" She looked up, met his eyes. "No," she said after a moment. "I was just too cold to keep trying to get up." He believed her. "All right," he said. "Then let's make sure you get warm and you rest. And in the morning, when you're ready, only when you're ready, I'd like to understand what happened." She said nothing. "Miss Harper," he said, "I've been running this household for 15 years. What happened to you tonight should not have happened inside these walls. I take that seriously." She looked at him again with that steady measuring gaze. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he said, "I don't." And that's part of the problem. Something moved across her face, then something he couldn't name, because he had never seen it on anyone's face directed at him before. It was something close to being seen. She looked away first. "Good night, Mr. Valenti," she said. "Good night, Miss Harper." He moved to the door. "If you need anything, tell me. There's a phone on the nightstand. My extension is the first one listed." He stepped out. He pulled the door almost closed, and then he heard her voice, very quiet, from inside the room. "Thank you for not leaving me in the snow." He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to his chair, and he stayed there until the first light came through the window at the end of the hall. By morning, 3 things had become clear. First, Victor Hale had not returned to the property, and his listed address in the staffing agency's files was a vacant apartment that had been empty for at least 3 months. Second, the staffing agency, Claremont Domestic Services, had placed both Victor Hale and Lillian Harper in the Valent household within an 8-week window of each other, which was unusual for an agency that typically placed 1 or 2 staff members per year with any given household. Third, and most troubling, Victor Hale's real name was not Victor Hale. Marcus discovered this at 7 in the morning and came to Damien's study immediately. The fingerprints lifted from the staff quarters. Victor had been using routine, standard procedure. Part of the Valenti household's security protocols had been run through a database that Damien had access to through certain arrangements that weren't entirely legal but were entirely reliable. The name that came back was not Victor Hale. It was Peter Crane. And Peter Crane had a history. He had worked previously as an investigator, not licensed, not legitimate for hire. His known clients included 3 different corporate entities, all of which were shells, all of which led, through layers of legal and financial construction, back to a man named Jeffrey Alderman. Damien knew that name, not well, not personally, but enough. Jeffrey Alderman was a financier, old money, new methods. He appeared in charity programs and civic boards and photographs with politicians. He was the kind of man whose name was always clean because he was very careful about what he put his actual name on. But in certain circles, among certain people who traded in the information that never appeared in newspapers, Jeffrey Alderman's name came up in conversations about very serious things. Damien sat with this information for a long time. Then he asked the question he had been working toward all morning. "Why," he said to Marcus, "would Jeffrey Alderman send a man into my household, specifically to find Lillian Harper?" Marcus had no answer, but Damien was beginning to form one. She came downstairs at 10:30. She was wearing different clothes a housekeeper had quietly provided some from the emergency supply kept in the staff rooms for visiting service workers, and her hair was tied back. The bruising on her face was worse in the full morning light. She walked, carefully, one hand briefly touching the wall at the base of the staircase. The kitchen staff stopped what they were doing and stared. Damien was in the dining room when she appeared in the doorway. He stood up. "Please, sit down," he said. "I asked the kitchen to prepare breakfast. I thought you might be hungry." She looked at the table set for two, which clearly surprised her, and then at him. "You're eating with me?" she said. "Yes," he said. "If that's all right." She sat down. She was still watching him with that guarded, calculating expression. He was beginning to understand that it was not distrust exactly. It was the expression of someone who had learned to measure every situation very carefully before deciding what to do with it. He sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She picked up the cup of tea that had been placed near her hand and wrapped her bandaged fingers around it. He watched her do it. He watched the small, careful way she moved, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "How long have you been afraid?" he asked. She looked up. "I'm not afraid right now," she said. "That's not what I asked." She set the cup down. She looked at the table for a moment, and when she looked up again, the calculation in her expression had shifted slightly, like a door that had opened 1 inch. "A long time," she said. He nodded. "He didn't push," she said, "the man who hurt me." "Did you find out who he is?" "His name isn't Victor Hale," Damien said. "His real name is Peter Crane, and he's been looking for you." She went very still, not surprised, not shocked, still. The kind of still that meant she already knew something was coming, and she was deciding right now whether to trust him with what she knew about it. "Miss Harper," Damien said quietly, "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know the full story, but I know enough to understand that what's happening to you is connected to something much larger than one man deciding to hurt someone. I know the name of the person I believe is behind this, and I want to understand why he would go to this much trouble to find you specifically." She looked at him steadily. "If I tell you," she said, "everything changes." "Everything already changed," he said. "Last night in the snow." She was quiet for a long moment. The house was warm around them. Outside the windows, the snow was still coming down, slow and soft. The kitchen staff had retreated to give them privacy. The dining room was very quiet. Then Lillian Harper said, "My father's name was Robert Harper. He was a financial advisor. A very good one. And about 4 years ago, he found something he wasn't supposed to find." She stopped. She picked up her tea again. And Damien Valenti leaned forward slightly in his chair, because he could hear in her voice, in the careful, measured way she had chosen those words, that whatever came next had been locked inside her for a very long time. "Tell me," he said. And she did. Robert Harper had been the kind of man who believed that doing the right thing was its own protection. That was the first thing Lillian said, and she said it the way people say things they've had to accept as tragedy, not with anger anymore, but with the flat, exhausted weight of something they've carried too long. He believed that if you were honest, and if you were careful, and if you documented everything properly, the truth would protect you, she said. "He taught me that." He believed it completely. She paused. He was wrong. Damien didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He had spent 30 years learning when to speak and when to let silence do its work, and right now silence was the most useful thing he had. Lillian set down her tea. She looked at her bandaged hands for a moment, then back at him. "My father worked for a firm called Alderman Prescott Financial Advisory Group," she said. "He'd been there for 11 years. He was good at his job, genuinely good. Clients trusted him. The firm trusted him. He managed portfolios for private individuals, some corporate accounts, nothing that should have put him anywhere dangerous." "Alderman," Damien said carefully. She looked at him. "You know the name." "I know of him," Damien said. "Go on." She took a breath. 3 years before my father disappeared, the firm started bringing in a different kind of client. Not individuals. Entities. Corporate structures that didn't have public profiles holding companies, private investment vehicles, offshore arrangements. My father wasn't assigned to those accounts directly. But he was good with numbers, and numbers have a way of not staying in their assigned boxes. She stopped again, pressed her lips together. He noticed discrepancies, she said. Not immediately. Not all at once. It was small things at first, transfers that moved through accounts in patterns that didn't match the stated investment activity. Capital that appeared in one place without a clear source. Returns reported on instruments that, when he looked closer, didn't actually exist. He was seeing money laundering, Damien said. He was seeing the edge of it, she said. He didn't understand the full scope for a long time. He thought maybe it was accounting errors, maybe sloppy record-keeping on the new accounts. He made internal notes. He flagged 2 anomalies through the firm's compliance process. She paused. Nothing happened. Someone buried it, Damien said. Someone buried it, she confirmed. So my father did something that he thought was responsible. He started keeping his own records, copies of transactions, internal communications, cross-referenced account activity. He built a file not to use, not yet, just to have. Just to be safe. Her voice tightened slightly on that last word. He was going to go to the regulatory authorities. He had a contact at the SEC he trusted. He was planning to do it properly, officially, through every correct channel. She stopped. The silence stretched. He never got the chance, she said. Damien said nothing. 4 years ago, in November, my father went to work on a Tuesday morning. He called me at noon. He always called at noon. Every Tuesday. That was just what he did. He said he had a meeting that afternoon with someone from the firm's legal department. He said not to worry. He said he thought everything was going to be fine. Her voice was very steady now, in the way that voices get when steadiness is the only thing holding them together. He never called again. They reported him missing? Damien asked. 3 days later, when I filed the report, because for 3 days everyone at the firm told me he had simply left. Taken a personal trip, that he'd mentioned needing some time away. She looked directly at Damien. My father had not taken a personal trip in 11 years. He went to work and he came home. That was what he did. What did the investigation find? Nothing, she said. No body, no evidence of violence. No paper trail that went anywhere useful. My father's personal computer had been wiped. His paper files at home, the copies he had made, were gone. Someone had been in our house. Someone who knew what to take and what to leave. She paused. The official conclusion was that he had left voluntarily. That he had personal issues. That she stopped. Took a breath. They made him sound like someone who fell apart and ran away. That was easier than the truth. Damien was very still. But they didn't get everything, he said. It wasn't a question. He could hear it in everything she hadn't said yet. She looked at him for a long moment. My father was old-fashioned about one thing, she said. He didn't trust digital storage completely. He kept physical backups. Not at home, not at the office. She hesitated. He kept them somewhere only I would know to look. The air in the dining room changed. Damien felt it, the particular charge that comes when a conversation turns and shows you its actual shape, and the actual shape is far larger and more dangerous than you understood when you walked into it. You have the files, he said. I have the files, she said. And then she said something that hit him harder than anything else she had told him. I've had them for 4 years, and in 4 years, I have never been able to find a single person I trusted enough to give them to. The breakfast went cold on both their plates. Neither of them noticed. She told him the rest of it in the kind of direct, economical way that people speak when they have rehearsed a story many times inside their own head and learned to strip it of everything that isn't necessary. After her father disappeared, Lillian had 2 weeks before she understood that the danger was not finished. A man she didn't recognize came to her apartment, her old apartment, the one she'd lived in during her last year of graduate school. He asked polite questions. He said he was from an insurance company, conducting a routine inquiry related to her father's accounts. He was not from an insurance company. She knew because of 3 things: the specific questions he asked, the specific terminology he used about the accounts, and the fact that the firm her father had worked for had already been notified through official channels that Lillian had no information relevant to any inquiry. Someone had told this man to come find her before those official channels were even closed. She had left her apartment that night. She'd taken what mattered, her father's backup documents, some cash, her laptop, and she had left. She had spent 3 weeks staying in short-term rentals under a borrowed name. She had contacted 2 lawyers. Both of them, within 2 days of taking her case, had abruptly become unavailable. No explanation, no returned calls. She had understood then that she was dealing with something that had very long reach and very quick reflexes. "So you disappeared," Damien said. "I became someone who was easy to overlook," she said. "I'd had a graduate school internship in household management. My mother's family had domestic staff when I was young, and I'd done a hospitality management program as part of my degree. I had real qualifications, so I created a real resume under a different name and found work as a maid. And you chose this house, specifically," Damien said. She met his eyes. "Yes, why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because Jeffrey Alderman doesn't touch the Valenti family," she said. "I don't know the full history. I don't need to. But in Chicago, there are certain lines that certain people don't cross. And your name is one of those lines." She paused. "I thought if I could stay close enough to that line, I'd be safe." Damien let that land. The irony of it pressed into him that she had specifically chosen to hide in his house because she believed his name would protect her. And for over 2 years it had. Until someone found her anyway. "But Crane found you," he said. "Someone sent him in after me," she said. "Which means someone knew where I was. Either they tracked me through the staffing agency or—" She stopped. "Or someone told them," Damien said. Her expression shifted. It was the first crack he'd seen in the measured composure she'd maintained since she started talking. A small, quick thing there and gone, but real. "I've been trying not to think about that," she said. "You have to think about it," he said, not unkindly. "If someone inside this household told Alderman where to find you, we need to know who it was." She nodded. She knew. She just hadn't wanted to say it out loud, because saying it out loud meant that the place she had believed was safe had never been completely safe at all. Damien looked at her. "The files your father left," he said. "Where are they?" She looked right back at him. "That's the question everyone wants answered," she said. "That's the reason Peter Crane was inside this house for 8 weeks. Not to hurt me, to find out where they are. And last night," Damien began. "Last night, I told him I'd destroyed them," she said. "I told him my father's documentation was gone, that I'd burned it years ago because I'd been scared that there was nothing left." She touched the bruising on her cheek with the edge of her bandaged fingers, very lightly. "He didn't believe me. He hurt you because you wouldn't tell him," Damien said. "He hurt me because he thought pain would make me tell the truth," she said. "He was wrong. And then he left, because I imagine he had to report back and figure out what to do next. And I was trying to get back inside, but I was cold and dizzy, and then I couldn't." She stopped. "And then you came." She said it simply, without drama. Like a fact. Damien looked at the woman across the table from him, 28 years old, living under a false name inside his house for over 2 years, carrying evidence that could destroy a very powerful man, protecting it alone, with nothing but her own nerve, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. Not the kind that came from power or performance. The deep kind. The kind you couldn't manufacture. "I need to ask you something," he said. "All right. The files, the documentation your father collected. What does it actually contain?" She was quiet for a moment. "Enough," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm going to give you right now," she said. And then, for the first time since she'd sat down, she said it with something that was almost the beginning of certainty, "Because I don't fully know yet if I can trust you." Damien looked at her. He should have been insulted. He was Damien Valenti. People did not tell him they weren't sure if they could trust him. People did not sit across his breakfast table and look at him the way she was looking at him right now, like he was a variable in an equation she hadn't finished solving. But he wasn't insulted. He was, against every instinct he'd built over 30 years, something closer to relieved. Because it meant she was careful, and careful was the only thing keeping her alive. "Fair enough," he said. He had Marcus run a full audit of the staffing agency by noon. Claremont Domestic Services had been operating for 7 years. On paper, it was a legitimate business. Solid client list, reasonable history, nothing that flagged under standard review. But when you dug past the standard review, past the registered address and the professional website and the listed board members, the ownership structure led through 2 intermediate companies to a holding entity based in Delaware that had no public profile whatsoever. That holding entity had been incorporated 6 months before Lillian Harper had first applied to Claremont Domestic Services. 6 months. Damien looked at that detail for a long time. That meant the agency hadn't just placed Crane inside his household to find Lillian. It meant the agency had possibly been set up with her in mind from the beginning. Or at minimum, that someone had been watching which agency she used and had then acquired influence over it. The resources that required the money, the patience, the reach pointed to someone who was not simply trying to manage a problem. This was someone who had been hunting a specific person for years. He called a man named Enzo Calabrese, not from his cell phone. From a line that he used for conversations he needed to keep clean. Enzo was not someone whose name appeared on any organization chart, and he was not someone Damien called often, but when he did call, he got answers that other people couldn't find. Jeffrey Alderman, Damien said. I need everything current. Enzo was quiet for a moment. That's a name I don't touch easily, he said. I'm not asking you to touch him, Damien said. I'm asking what you know. Another pause. Then Alderman has been moving faster in the last 18 months. Consolidating some of his structured accounts, shifting capital through different vehicles. There's been quiet talk that something inside his financial operation is unstable, that someone, somewhere, has information that could create complications for him. Complications, Damien said. The kind that end careers, Enzo said. The kind that end more than careers. Is he nervous? Men like Alderman don't show nervous, but they act differently when they're nervous. He paused. He's been acting differently. Thank you, Damien said. He ended the call. He sat with this for a moment. Jeffrey Alderman was afraid. He was afraid because Robert Harper's files were still out there somewhere. And he had spent 4 years trying to find them, which meant he knew or strongly suspected that they were real, that they were complete, and that they were damaging enough to justify everything he'd spent finding them. The question that lived underneath all of this was the one Damien couldn't answer yet. What was in those files? Lillian spent the afternoon in the guest room. Damien didn't push. He had the kitchens send up food and made sure the staff knew she was not to be disturbed and not to be asked questions. By mid-afternoon, 2 things happened that changed the temperature of the day. The first was a phone call from an unlisted number that came to the main estate line at 2:17. Whoever was on the other end asked for Lillian Harper by name, her real name. Not her alias, not the name in the staff records, her real name. They waited for 3 seconds when the call was answered by the duty staff, and then they hung up. Damien was told immediately. He didn't react visibly. He said, log it. Don't mention it to anyone outside this room. But inside, he registered what it meant with complete precision. Whoever was behind this now knew that Lillian was here, in this house, under his protection. They were not hiding anymore. They were sending a signal. The second thing happened at 3:40, when Marcus came to Damien's study with the expression of a man carrying news he would prefer not to carry. We found the connection inside the house, Marcus said. Damien put down what he was reading. Tell me, Elena Marsh. She's been with the household for 4 years, handles the calendar and communication coordination for the household management side. We ran a full financial audit on staff the way you asked. He put a printed sheet on the desk. She received 3 wire transfers over the past 6 months. Small enough not to flag automatically. They trace back through an intermediary account to a communications firm that has documented links to one of Alderman's shell structures. Damien looked at the sheet. He said nothing for a long moment. Where is Elena Marsh right now? He asked. Her shift ended at 2 o'clock. She's off property. She's not coming back, Damien said. It wasn't a question. My guess, Marcus said, is that she's already been told the situation has changed and she needs to stay away. Damien nodded once. Have her removed from all access lists. Contact our legal team. I want documentation on the wire transfers, prepared for potential handover to law enforcement. But nothing moves on that until I say so. Understood. Marcus hesitated. How did they know to place her here before Lillian Harper was even hired? She's been on staff for 4 years. Harper only came here 2 years ago. Damien looked at the printout. They may have had multiple plants in multiple households, he said. Anyone Lillian might plausibly apply to. They had the agency watching for applications. When she came through Claremont, they activated whoever they had in place here. He paused. The resources on this are significant. They really want those files, Marcus said. More than that, Damien said quietly. They're afraid of them. After Marcus left, Damien went upstairs. He knocked on the guest room door. Lillian said, "Come in." She was sitting in the chair by the window, not looking out. Looking at her bandaged hands in her lap, she looked up when he came in. Her expression read him immediately. She could see something had shifted. "What happened?" she asked. He told her about the phone call. He told her about Elena Marsh. He watched her face as he told her. She absorbed it without visible collapse. But something in her shoulders changed, a settling, like the last support beam finally giving way under a weight that had been too heavy for too long. 4 years, she said quietly. I spent 4 years trying to disappear. And they always have someone close. Not anymore, he said. Not in this house. She looked at him. You can't guarantee that. I can do considerably better than most at guaranteeing it, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Then her expression settled into something more serious. The phone call, she said. They used my real name. Yes. That was deliberate, she said. They wanted you to know that they know. They're not trying to be quiet anymore. She paused. That means something changed. They're accelerating. Damien nodded. He'd reached the same conclusion. What would make them accelerate? She thought about it. And then something moved across her face, a recognition, a connection forming in real time. I told Crane I'd destroyed the files, she said. He didn't believe me. But if he reported that to Alderman, if Alderman thinks there's a chance the files might actually be gone, she stopped. He'd want to confirm it, one way or another, before the window closes. What window? Damien asked. She looked at him steadily. There's a regulatory review coming, she said. My father found out about it before he disappeared. A broad inquiry into certain structured financial instruments, the kind of vehicles that Alderman has been using. It was supposed to happen 2 years ago and got delayed. But it's been rescheduled. She paused. My contact, the one my father trusted at the SEC, he reached out to me 8 months ago. Carefully. He told me the review was coming back. When? Damien asked. 60 days, she said, maybe less. Damien was quiet. 60 days. If Alderman is under a regulatory review, and someone produces your father's documentation during that review, he said slowly, it doesn't just damage him. It destroys him. Everything he's built. Everything he's done, she corrected quietly. The laundering, the structured fraud, the accounts. My father found connections that go back 15 years. If those files reach the right people at the right time, Jeffrey Alderman goes to prison. Along with a number of people connected to him. Damien looked at her. And if they can either get the files or confirm they don't exist, he said, Alderman is safe. Yes, she said. Which is why they're not being quiet anymore, he said. They don't have time to be quiet. The room was very still. Lillian said, I need you to understand something. I am not asking you to fight this for me. I'm not asking you to put yourself in the middle of Jeffrey Alderman's business because of what happened to me. She held his gaze. I am only telling you this because you asked, and because you deserve to know what you've gotten close to by bringing me inside. Damien looked at her for a long moment. You've been alone with this for 4 years, he said. Yes. And in those 4 years, he said, has being alone with it worked? She said nothing. You're still running, he said. Files are still hidden. The people responsible for what happened to your father are still operating. And last night you came 2 degrees of temperature away from dying in the snow outside my house. He let that sit for a moment. With respect, Miss Harper, being alone with it has not worked. She looked at him. Something in her eyes moved. Not trust, not yet, not completely. But the wall that had been there since the moment he walked into the guest room at 4 in the morning was a fraction thinner. "What would you do," she asked, "if I showed you what was in those files?" "That depends on what's in them," he said honestly. "But I can tell you this, Jeffrey Alderman doesn't frighten me. And the people he uses don't frighten me. And I have resources and connections that you have been surviving without for 4 years that could change the shape of this problem significantly." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, "My father's message to me, before he disappeared, the last thing he put in writing, said to trust someone who protects people when nobody is watching." She looked at Damien. "I watched you sit outside my door all night," she said. "The kitchen staff told me this morning. They said you sat there in the hallway chair until sunrise." He said nothing. "You didn't know me," she said. "You didn't know what I was carrying. You didn't know if I was worth it." "You were worth it," he said simply. "You didn't need to be worth anything in particular. You were a person who needed protecting." She looked at him for a very long time. And then Lillian Harper, who had run from everyone and everything for 4 years, who had learned to trust no one and believe in nothing that couldn't be verified twice, said quietly, "The files are in a safe deposit box at First Meridian Bank on West Adams Street. Box number 317. My father registered it under his sister's name, my Aunt Clara. She passed away 2 years ago without ever knowing the box existed." She paused. "I have the key." Damien held very still. "All right," he said. "There's a condition," she said. "Name it." "I go with you," she said. "I don't hand the key to anyone. I don't let anyone else handle the files. When we get to the regulatory contact, the person my father trusted, I present them myself. This is my father's work. It's his proof." Her voice caught, just slightly, just once. "His last thing. I'm not handing it to anyone else to carry." Damien nodded. "Agreed," he said. "You understand that this puts you directly against Jeffrey Alderman," she said. "Whatever arrangement he may or may not have with your families." "There is no arrangement," Damien said evenly. "Alderman has always known to stay away from my operations. He's been careful to do exactly that." This he gestured toward her, toward the window, toward everything the afternoon had revealed. "This is him making a mistake he didn't have to make. And I don't forgive mistakes that land in my house." She absorbed this. Then she said, "When do we move?" "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we plan." He paused. "But Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and they both noticed it. He didn't apologize for it. "We need to move before they do." "Which means we move soon." She nodded. He turned to go. "Mr. Valenti," she said. He stopped. "Do you know what the hardest part of the last 4 years has been?" she said. He turned back. "Not the running," she said, "not the fear. Not even losing my father." She looked at him steadily. "The hardest part has been knowing that what he found was real, that real people were being hurt by it, and being the only person in the world who could do something about it, and not being able to do anything at all." Damien Valenti stood in the doorway of the guest room and looked at the woman his security system had missed, his staff had overlooked, and his house had failed to protect. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt the full weight of what it meant to be someone who had power. Not the weight of having it, the weight of what it required him to do with it. "You won't be the only person anymore," he said. He left. Downstairs, he called Mark, called Enzo, and called his attorney. The evening was just beginning, and 60 days in Damien Valenti's world was more than enough time. The call came at 6:47 in the morning. Damien was already awake. He had slept 3 hours not from exhaustion, but from discipline. He had learned decades ago that a man who couldn't function on 3 hours when necessary was a man with a vulnerability he couldn't afford. He was at his desk with coffee and the preliminary report from Enzo when his secure line rang. He looked at the number. He picked up immediately. "Tell me," he said. It was Enzo. His voice had a different quality than it had the night before, tighter, faster. "Alderman moved last night. 2 of his people visited First Meridian Bank at closing time yesterday. They didn't get inside, the bank was locked, but they were there, asking questions of a security guard outside about access procedures for safe deposit boxes, specifically about what documentation would be required for a next-of-kin claim on a deceased account holder. Damien set down his coffee. Clara Harper, the aunt. The box registered under a dead woman's name. They had found the bank. How? Damien asked. We think Crane, Enzo said. Before he ran, he may have had more than we assumed. If he got close enough to her over 8 weeks, built enough of a relationship, watched her habits, followed her on her days off. She went to the bank, Damien said, not a question. He was thinking about Lillian on her days off, where a woman alone and frightened goes when she needs to confirm that the only thing keeping her alive is still where she left it. We think she visited the box twice in the past year. Crane may have followed her at least once without her knowing. Damien was already standing. How long do we have before they can execute a next-of-kin access claim? He said. If they have the right paperwork fabricated, and these people can fabricate paperwork 48 hours. Maybe less if they have someone inside the bank. Damien said thank you and ended the call. He went upstairs and knocked on Lillian's door without hesitation. She answered quickly. She hadn't slept well either. He could see it in her face, in the way she was already dressed and sitting upright, like someone who had been waiting for the night to end. We have a problem, he said. We need to move today. She read his expression and didn't waste time asking if he was sure. How bad, she said. They found the bank. Not the box number, not yet, but they know which branch. They're pursuing a next-of-kin claim on your aunt's accounts. She went very still. Then she said, how long? 48 hours at the outside. Less if we're unlucky. He paused. Can you travel your... I can travel, she said immediately. There was no hesitation in it. Whatever pain she was in, she had already decided it wasn't relevant. We go in 2 hours, he said. I'm pulling a small team together. Rourke drives. Marcus and one other man I trust come with us. We go to the bank. We retrieve what's in that box, and we move directly from the bank to a location I control where we can assess what we have and plan the next step. She nodded. Then she said, you need to know something first. He waited. The box doesn't just have documents, she said. My father, he was meticulous. He didn't just keep records of the transactions. He kept records of the people, names, dates, specific communications. Some of it is correspondence he copied without the senders knowing. She met his eyes. There are names in those files that will surprise you. Surprise me how, he said carefully. People you may know, she said. People in positions that make them feel untouchable. My father spent years understanding that the reason this kind of fraud survives is because it reaches into places where scrutiny doesn't normally go. She held his gaze. I need you to be prepared for that. Before we open the box, you need to decide that whatever is in there doesn't change your commitment to seeing it through. Damien looked at her. This woman, 24 hours removed from being left for dead in the snow, was asking him to make a promise before she allowed him to help her. Whatever is in that box, he said, goes where it needs to go. You have my word. She looked at him for a moment longer. All right, she said. 2 hours. They were on the road by 9:15. Rourke drove. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat. Damien and Lillian were in the back, a second vehicle, 2 men. Damien trusted absolutely followed at a distance of 3 cars. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Lillian said quietly, he used to take me to the bank when I was little. My father. He said it was important to understand where money lived. Not how to spend it, how it moved. Where it rested, what it meant. She paused. He said money was just information. The numbers were just information. And information always told the truth if you knew how to read it. Damien said, he sounds like someone worth knowing. She said, he was the most honest person I've ever met. Which is why it never occurred to him that honesty could get you killed. The city moved around the car. Chicago in winter, gray and cold, all steel and compressed air. Do you think he's alive? Damien asked. She was quiet for a long time. I think if he were alive, he would have found a way to reach me, she said. My father was resourceful, and he knew how to find me if he needed to. We had an arrangement, a system, a specific signal he could have used. She looked at the window. In 4 years, that signal has never come. Damien said nothing. I made peace with it, she said. Mostly. But what I haven't made peace with is the idea that he died and nothing happened. That the people responsible just continued. Just kept going, making money, attending fundraisers, shaking hands with senators. Her voice was completely level. "That's the part I cannot accept." "Then we don't accept it," Damien said. She turned to look at him. He was looking straight ahead, and he said it the same way he said everything, without decoration, without performance. Just as a fact, just as a thing that was now true. Something in Lillian Harper's face did something it hadn't done in 4 years. It softened. Not completely, but enough. First Meridian Bank on West Adams was a Midstandfonders busy enough that individuals could move through it without drawing significant attention, quiet enough that staff knew the regulars. Damien had been here once before, years ago, for an unrelated matter. He knew the layout. He also knew, as they parked half a block away, and Marcus did a quick visual check of the street, that the 2 men who had been here the evening before asking about next-of-kin procedures were almost certainly not done. "Marcus," he said. "Already looking," Marcus said. He was watching a parked sedan 30 meters up the street with the particular focused disinterest of a man who had spent many years watching things. Gray Nissan. 2 occupants. Parked in a loading zone since at least 8:50. Nobody has gotten out. Damien looked. He said very calmly, "All right. Change of plan. Lillian and I go in alone. You and the team stay mobile, keep eyes on the sedan. If anyone from that vehicle moves toward the bank entrance, I want to know immediately." "That's a risk," Marcus said. "Sending you in with us is a larger one," Damien said. 2 people drawing no attention is better than 4 people drawing attention. He looked at Lillian. "You've done this before. Going into the bank, getting the box. You know the procedure." "Yes," she said. "We go in as a couple," he said. "I'll follow your lead on the interaction with the staff." She didn't flinch at the word couple. She just nodded, already shifting into the focused efficiency that he was beginning to understand was what she looked like when she was managing something dangerous. "The key is in my coat lining," she said. "I sewed it in there 8 months ago." A pause. "Don't react to anything the staff says to you. Let me handle the conversation." They got out of the car. They walked into the bank together. She walked slightly close to his left side, not touching, but close, and he matched her pace exactly, and to anyone watching, they were simply 2 people with a shared errand on a cold morning. The safe deposit box area required a staff escort and a signature check. The woman behind the desk, middle-aged, professional. The kind of person who had been doing this job long enough that nothing surprised her, looked at the access card and the signature Lillian provided under Clara Harper's account, and then looked up. "We haven't seen you in a few months, Ms. Harper," she said pleasantly. "I've been away," Lillian said, with a smile that was warm enough to be real and brief enough to not invite conversation. "I just need a few minutes with the box today." "Of course," the woman said. She looked at Damien with polite professional inquiry. "My husband," Lillian said simply. The woman nodded and led them back. Damien said nothing. He did not look at Lillian. But he registered, with the part of his mind that registered everything, that she had said the word without any hesitation at all. They were alone with the box for 9 minutes. The room was small, private. The box, when Lillian opened it, with the key she'd cut from her coat lining with small scissors the bank staff had provided, held 4 things. A thick envelope of printed documents, pages filled with financial data, account numbers, transaction records. Damien did not touch them. He looked at them. A second envelope, sealed, with his father's handwriting on the front that said, simply, "For the authority that comes after." A USB drive in a small plastic case, and a handwritten letter, 3 pages, in the careful, precise handwriting of a man who wanted to be understood clearly. Lillian put her hand on the letter and held it there for a moment. She didn't read it. She already knew what it said. She had read it many times. She looked at Damien. "The printed documents are the financial records," she said quietly. "The USB has the digital copies and the communications he copied. The sealed envelope is addressed to regulatory authorities and contains a formal declaration of everything he found." She paused. He wrote it like he knew someone would need to present it without him. "He knew," Damien said. "Yes," she said. "I think on some level he always knew." She put everything back into the envelope her father had prepared. He had organized it for exactly this purpose, for exactly this kind of handover, and she put it inside the interior of her coat. Then she stopped. She said, "There's one name in the financial records that I should tell you now, before we leave, so you're not blindsided when you see it." Damien waited. She said the name. It was not Jeffrey Alderman's name. It was the name of a federal judge, a man who had been on the bench for 19 years, a man who was currently assigned to review cases involving regulatory matters in the Northern District of Illinois. A man whose name, if it appeared in connection with fraudulent financial structures, would not just destroy Jeffrey Alderman, it would send a detonation through the legal infrastructure of the entire region. Damien was silent for 3 seconds. That was a long time for Damien Valenti to be silent. "Your father found a sitting federal judge," he said, "receiving structured payments through one of Alderman's shell vehicles," she said, "for 8 years. In exchange for what? For making certain cases disappear," she said. Regulatory referrals that stopped moving. Investigations that lost momentum at the judicial level. "My father found the mechanism." She looked at him steadily. "This is why the SEC contact couldn't move before. This is why the regulatory review got delayed 2 years ago. Someone was controlling the machinery." Damien stared at her. And then he understood completely, fully, for the first time, why Robert Harper had disappeared. Not because he'd found fraud. Fraud was manageable. Fraud could be litigated, minimized, settled. He had disappeared because he found the reason the fraud was invincible. He'd found the person who made it untouchable. "Who knows?" Damien said. "Who else knows what's in these files?" "No one," she said. "Only me, and now you." He absorbed this. "Your SEC contact," he said. "The person your father trusted. Does he know the judge's name is in these files?" "No," she said. "He knew the files existed. He didn't know the contents." Damien said, "We can't go through the standard SEC submission process. Not with a federal judge involved. If that name lands in the wrong inbox." "I know," she said. "I've known for 4 years. That's why I've been stuck. Because every official channel I could think of runs the risk of passing through someone connected to him." She looked at him. "That's the real reason I needed someone outside the official world. Someone whose reach doesn't depend on the same structures Alderman controls." Damien looked at her. The shape of what she'd actually needed, what she'd been looking for all along, settled into place. She hadn't just needed a protector. She'd needed someone who operated in a world that Alderman's money and the judge's power couldn't easily reach. Someone who had their own infrastructure, their own channels, their own version of untouchable. She had needed someone exactly like him. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Marcus, gray Nissan just moved. Driver got out. Heading for the bank entrance. You have about 90 seconds. Damien looked up at Lillian. "We have to go," he said. "Right now." They came out through the side exit, a route Damien had identified when they came in, the way he always identified alternate exits in any space he entered. Marcus's voice was already in his earpiece. "Subject is at the main entrance, talking to the door staff. He doesn't know which way you came in yet. Your vehicle is 30 meters left. Move now." They moved. Lillian didn't run. Running attracted attention. She walked fast and steady beside him, her coat closed over the documents, her face calm with the particular calm of someone who had rehearsed dangerous exits in her head many times. They reached the car. Rourke had it running. They were inside and moving before the door was fully closed. The second man stayed in the sedan, Marcus said through the earpiece. "He's on a phone. They're going to know you were there. They already suspected we'd be there," Damien said. "They just don't know what we got." He looked at Lillian. She had her hand pressed flat against her coat, over the documents. "You're all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, but her voice was slightly thinner than usual. "Lillian, I'm all right," she said again, more firmly. I've been waiting for this for 4 years, and now it's real, and I don't know what to do with it being real." She took a breath. "I'm fine. What happens next?" "We go somewhere safe and we make some calls," he said. Carefully, the car moved through the city. Damien was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The standard channels were compromised. The local judicial structure was compromised. The regulatory contact was trustworthy but limited. He could receive the files, but if he acted through the district's normal processes, the judge could kill the inquiry before it started, which meant they needed to go around the district entirely. Damien had one contact at the federal level, not law enforcement, not regulatory, but someone whose position gave him access to both, someone who operated above the regional structure. Someone who owed Damien a very old and very significant debt that had never been collected. He had never intended to collect it. He was revising that intention now. "There's someone I need to call," he told Lillian. "A federal contact. Someone above the district level. Someone who can receive what you have and act on it through a channel that bypasses the judge's reach entirely." She looked at him. "You trust this person?" "I trust what they owe me," he said. "Which is more reliable than trust." She held his gaze. "And if this person decides the safest thing is to make what we have disappear, the way everyone else has been doing for 4 years, then they'll have a problem with me," Damien said. "And they know what that means." She studied him. "This is your world," she said. "Not an accusation, just a statement." "Yes," he said. "And in my world, certain things are very clear. When someone is owed something, they pay it. When someone is protected, they stay protected. And when someone makes a mistake inside my house," his voice didn't change in tone at all, but something in it shifted, like a temperature drop. "They answer for it." Lillian was quiet. Then she said, "My father said something once. He said that in a corrupt system, the only people who ever actually changed anything were the ones who weren't afraid of the system. Because the system only has power over people who need something from it." She looked at Damien. "You don't need anything from Jeffrey Alderman's system," she said. "Nothing," he said. "And the judge?" "A federal judge has judicial power," Damien said. "I have other kinds," he paused. "They're not lesser." She absorbed this. Outside, the city continued its cold, indifferent motion, traffic moving, people walking, Chicago going about its business, completely unaware that inside one black car, 4 years of a dead man's work was finally moving toward the light. They were 20 minutes from the estate when Marcus spoke from the front seat. "Crane," he said. "We found him." Damien said, "Where?" "He's been at a motel in Cicero since the night he left the property. He's been there for 2 days. He's alone." Marcus paused. "Enzo's people tracked him through a burner phone he made the mistake of using to contact Alderman's organization. He made the call from the motel's location." Damien thought about this. Peter Crane had run, but he'd stayed in the city. He hadn't gone far, and he'd broken contact protocol by making a traceable call. Which meant one of two things. Either he was waiting for instructions, or he was panicking and making mistakes. Panicking men made useful witnesses. "Don't touch him," Damien said. "Watch him. I want to know everything he does and everyone he contacts. If he tries to move out of the city, stop him quietly. I want him available." "Available for what?" Marcus asked. "For a conversation," Damien said. "When the time is right." He looked at Lillian. She had heard all of this. "Crane is the direct link between Alderman and what happened to you," Damien said. "His testimony, if it can be obtained, is additional evidence on top of your father's files. It fills in gaps about current operations, current methods. It makes the case more complete." "He won't volunteer that testimony," she said. "No," Damien agreed. "But people's willingness to cooperate changes significantly when they understand the exact nature of their alternatives." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not just trying to protect me," she said slowly. "You're trying to build a complete case." "I'm trying to finish what your father started," he said. "Properly, in a way that sticks, so that whatever happens next, whatever Alderman's lawyers argue, whatever procedural challenge gets made, the evidence is so comprehensive that there's no way around it." Lillian was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. Not hope exactly. Hope was too fragile a word for what it was. It was more like recognition. The recognition of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long, that they'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone standing next to them. "You've been planning this since last night," she said. "Since this morning," he said. "Last night I was still catching up." She looked out the window. Then she said very quietly, "He would have liked you." Damien said nothing for a moment. Then, "He sounds like someone worth living up to." They reached the estate at 11:40. Damien went directly to his study and made the call he'd been composing in his head for the last 20 minutes. The man he called a man whose name will remain here simply as a federal contact with reach above the regional structure answered on the second ring. When Damien explained, briefly and precisely, what he had, there was a long silence on the other end. Then the man said, "The judge's name is in there." "Documented," Damien said. 8 years of structured payments. Transaction records, communication copies, everything. Another silence. "This is significant," the man said. "I know what it is," Damien said. "The question is whether you're able to receive it through a channel that doesn't go through the district." "It would have to go through Washington," the man said. "Directly. This kind of judicial conduct allegation needs to be handled above the district level anyway. That's standard protocol when there's conflict of interest." "Can you initiate that?" The man was quiet for a moment. "You know what you're asking me to do." "I know exactly what I'm asking," Damien said. "And I know what you owe me. I've never asked for anything in 20 years. I'm asking now." A pause. "Send me what you have," the man said. "Securely. I'll make the contact in Washington today." Damien ended the call. He sat back. He looked at the wall of his study, the room where he had made 1,000 decisions over 30 years, where he had built an empire that his enemies respected and his allies depended on. He thought about what he was doing right now, and whether it aligned with who he had spent 30 years becoming. And he found, somewhat to his own surprise, that it did. Not because protecting Lillian Harper was good for his business. Not because exposing Jeffrey Alderman eliminated a competitor. But because Robert Harper had been an honest man who had done everything right and been destroyed for it, and his daughter had spent 4 years carrying the weight of that injustice alone, and Damien had the ability to change that. And he was choosing to. He went to find Lillian. She was in the sitting room off the main hall, the documents spread carefully on the low table in front of her. Not reading them, she knew them already. Just having them out. Just letting them exist in the open, in a warm room, in a safe house, for what was perhaps the first time. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. "It's in motion," he said. She looked at the documents. Then she looked at him. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I haven't told you yet." He came into the room. "My father's letter," she said. "The handwritten one, the 3 pages. I told you I'd read it many times." "That's true." She paused. "But there's one part I've never been able to say out loud." "Not to anyone." He waited. At the end of the letter, she said, "My father wrote, 'If you are reading this because I am gone, then I need you to know that you were never the reason I was afraid. You were the reason I was brave. Everything I did, because I could not imagine a world where my daughter lived in it, and the people who hurt good people were never answered for.'" She stopped. Her voice had held perfectly steady all the way through. Right up until the last word. Then it didn't. She pressed her hand over her mouth briefly 1 second too and pulled it back. She didn't look away from him. She didn't apologize. Damien Valenti stood very still. He had spent his entire adult life building walls between himself and the kind of emotion that made people vulnerable. He had made those walls strong, and he had made them reliable, and he had never once regretted them. But standing in that room, watching Lillian Harper hold herself together with everything she had while her father's last words moved through her, he felt one of those walls do something it had never done before. It moved. Not much. But it moved. "He was right about you," Damien said quietly. She looked at him. "You've been brave," he said. "For a very long time. Alone." He held her gaze. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The room was very quiet. Outside, the winter held the estate in its cold grip. But inside, something was shifting the way temperature shifts, gradually, until you realize the air around you has fundamentally changed, and you cannot say exactly when it happened. Lillian Harper looked at the man standing in the doorway. And she thought, "My father said to trust someone who protects people when nobody is watching." She thought about a man sitting alone in a hallway chair until sunrise, for a woman he didn't know. She thought about 60 days. She thought about everything that still needed to happen. And for the first time in 4 years, she thought that maybe it was actually going to. The call from Washington came at 7 the next morning. Damien was already at his desk. He hadn't slept. Not because he couldn't, but because the night had been moving, messages coming in from Enzo's network, updates from Marcus. The particular background hum of a situation that had too many moving parts to leave unattended. He'd been tracking everything, cross-referencing, building a picture in his mind the way he always built pictures, layer by layer, nothing assumed, everything verified. When the Washington contact called, Damien listened for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "How quickly can they move?" The answer was, faster than he'd expected. The documentation, Robert Harper's files, 4 years of meticulous financial record-keeping, the USB drive, the sealed formal declaration had been received securely the night before. The Washington contact had taken them directly to a senior official in the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section, which handled federal judicial misconduct. That official had spent 3 hours reviewing the materials and then made 2 phone calls of her own. By midnight, a preliminary review had been authorized. By 7 in the morning, 2 federal investigators from outside the Northern District of Illinois, specifically chosen to eliminate any possibility of jurisdictional contamination, were on a flight to Chicago. "They want to meet with the source," the contact told Damien. "I'll arrange it," Damien said. "When they land, they come here first. Not a field office, not a government building. Here. On my terms." A pause. "That's irregular. So is a sitting federal judge taking 8 years of structured payments from a money launderer," Damien said. "We can discuss irregular." The contact agreed. Damien put down the phone and went to find Lillian. She was in the kitchen not eating, just sitting at the small table near the window, with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, looking at nothing in particular. When he came in, she looked up immediately, reading his face the way she had learned to do over the past 48 hours. "Something happened," she said. "Something good," he said. He sat down across from her. "Federal investigators. Public Integrity Section. They've reviewed your father's materials, and they want to meet with you today." She set down the mug very carefully. "Today," she repeated. "This afternoon." Here he held her gaze. "I told them this happens on your terms. You decide what you share, how you share it, and at what pace. I'll be in the room." She looked at him. "You don't have to be in the room." "I know," he said. "I'll be in the room." Something moved across her face, that flicker of being seen that he had noticed the first night, and that appeared less and less rarely now, because she was letting her guard down in increments so small that it would take someone paying very close attention to notice. Damien was paying very close attention. "All right," she said. "This afternoon." He nodded. He started to stand. "Damien," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He stopped. He looked at her. She looked like she wanted to say something, and then decided on something simpler than whatever she'd originally intended. "Thank you," she said, "for not making this feel like I'm being handed over." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not being handed over," he said. "You're taking the next step. There's a difference." He left the kitchen. In the hallway, he stopped, stood still for a moment, and acknowledged to himself what had just happened. She had used his name. 4 days ago, she had been unconscious in the snow. This morning, she was preparing to face federal investigators, and she had used his first name like it was natural. He had noticed. He was still noticing. He went to his study and did not examine that fact any further. There was too much to do. At 10:30, Marcus came in with news about Crane. "He moved," Marcus said, "this morning. Left the motel in Cicero at 8:45. He didn't go to the airport. He went to a building in the West Loop, a private office registered to one of Alderman's shell companies." Damien was immediately alert. He went to Alderman. "Appears so. My people tracked him to the building. He was inside for 40 minutes. When he came out, he looked." Marcus paused, choosing the word carefully. "Scared." Damien thought about this. Crane had gone to Alderman directly, which meant one of 2 things. Either Alderman had summoned him, and Crane was too afraid to refuse, or Crane was trying to manage the situation and had made the decision to report in person rather than through channels. Either way, Alderman now knew exactly how much had gone wrong. He knew Crane had failed to get the files. He knew Lillian was under Damien Valenti's protection. He knew his people had gone to the bank and found nothing because Damien had gotten there first. And he knew that 4 years of careful pursuit had collapsed in 72 hours. What would a man like Alderman do with that information? He's going to escalate, Damien said. That's my read, Marcus said. What does escalation look like for someone like Alderman? Damien said, more to himself than to Marcus. He was thinking out loud, which he rarely did, but Marcus had long since learned to treat those moments as real questions. He has money, Marcus said. He has the judge, though that card is harder to play right now. He has Crane, who is now compromised. He has whatever other assets he built into the structure over 15 years. He paused. And he has lawyers, lots of lawyers. The lawyers come later, Damien said. Right now, he's trying to decide whether to contain or to destroy. Contain how? By making the evidence disappear, or by making the person presenting it disappear. Damien's voice was completely flat on that last part. Which is why this afternoon's meeting needs to happen fast, and it needs to happen with everything documented and transmitted to Washington before anyone on Alderman's side can move against it. Marcus said, I'll double the perimeter. Triple it, Damien said. And I want Rourke in the vehicle closest to the front entrance. If anything feels wrong during the meeting, we move Lillian immediately. She does not stay in one place. Understood. Marcus moved to go. One more thing, Damien said. Crane. The 40 minutes he spent with Alderman, I want to know if we can get anything from that meeting. Phones intercepted. Anything. Marcus gave him a very level look. That crosses some lines. I'm aware, Damien said. Do what you can within what you're willing to do. I'm not asking you to break federal law. I'm asking you to use every resource that isn't illegal. There may be a gray area, Marcus said. I've spent 30 years in the gray area, Damien said. Use your judgment. Marcus left. Damien sat with the quiet for a moment. The shape of the board was becoming clear. Alderman was moving toward desperation, and desperation in powerful men was the most dangerous state. Desperate men abandoned strategy and went for directness, crude, forceful, immediate. They made the mistakes that careful men didn't make. But they also sometimes took actions that couldn't be undone. He picked up his phone and called the Washington contact again. I need the meeting this afternoon to be the formal intake, he said. Everything transmitted to Washington the moment it's received. Not held locally, not processed at the district level. Direct to the DOJ office that authorized the review. That's already the plan, the contact said. I need it to be explicitly confirmed, Damien said. Because the person who built that case spent 4 years watching evidence disappear. I need her to watch it not disappear. A pause. You'll have confirmation before the meeting starts, the contact said. Damien ended the call. He thought about Lillian sitting in the kitchen with her coffee. He thought about a man named Robert Harper who had gone to work on a Tuesday morning and never come home. He thought about what it meant that a financial advisor who trusted in honest systems had spent the last years of his life, and possibly his life itself, building a case that his daughter had spent 4 years keeping alive, and that it had taken a mafia boss sitting outside a guest room door all night to finally get it moving. The world was a strange thing. He didn't examine that thought any further either. The federal investigators arrived at 2 in the afternoon. 2 women. Both mid-40s, both with the particular professional composure of people who had spent careers inside rooms where the information was heavy and the stakes were real. They showed credentials at the gate, submitted to Marcus's security check without complaint, and came into the house with the kind of quiet efficiency that Damien respected. He met them in the main hall. The senior of the 2 agent Patricia Morse extended her hand. Mr. Valenti, we appreciate your cooperation. I'm not cooperating with you, Damien said pleasantly. I'm facilitating access to a witness who came to be under my protection through circumstances you already know. There's a distinction. Morse looked at him. She was a woman who had clearly spent a great deal of time not being impressed by powerful men, and she was not about to start now. Understood, she said. He showed them to the sitting room. Lillian was already there. She stood when they came in. She was wearing different clothes than she'd had. On the past 2 days, the housekeeper had quietly gathered some things in Lillian's approximate size, and her hair was down. The bruising on her face had deepened into that middle stage where it looks worse before it starts looking better. She stood very straight. Damien introduced them. Lillian shook their hands. Then she looked at Damien. He gave her the smallest nod. She sat down, and she began. He stayed in the room as he'd said he would. He didn't speak unless asked a direct question, and he wasn't asked any. He simply sat in the chair near the window and listened. And what he listened to for the next 2 hours was something he had not fully understood until now: the complete architecture of what Robert Harper had built. The financial records documented 14 years of layered money laundering through structures so complex that it had taken a meticulous financial professional years to decode them. The funds moved through legitimate investment vehicles, were cycled through offshore accounts, were returned to the United States through real estate transactions, art purchases, and charitable foundations, specifically foundations that made donations to political campaigns and judicial election funds. The judicial election funds. That was the mechanism. Not direct payments to the judge, nothing that crude. Structured donations to electoral vehicles disbursed through intermediary PACs that had funded 3 successive campaigns for the bench. 8 years of financial dependency, invisible in plain sight, legal at every documented step, corrupt at every actual one. The communications copies Robert Harper had collected showed correspondence between aldermen and 2 attorneys who had served as intermediaries, never names, always coded references, but with enough consistency across years of documentation that the pattern was unmistakable. When Lillian finished, both investigators were quiet for a moment. Moore said, "Miss Harper, this documentation is exceptionally thorough. Your father was, this is remarkable work." Lillian said, "He was a careful man. The USB drive you've provided, we'll need to have our forensic team verify the metadata, confirm authenticity. That's standard." "I know," Lillian said. "My father anticipated that. The creation dates on every file are logged against the server timestamps from the firm's own systems that still exist and can be independently verified." He was careful about that, specifically. Morse looked at her partner. Something passed between them. "There's one more thing," Lillian said. She reached into her pocket. She put a small additional USB drive on the table, one Damien had not seen before. He looked at it. Morse looked at it. "My father wasn't the only one who kept records," Lillian said. "Over the past 4 years, while I was hiding, I kept my own. Every person who contacted me, every person who approached me, every suspicious interaction I had. Dates, descriptions, any identifying information I could collect." She paused. "I documented Peter Crane's 8 weeks in this household. His approach to me, the escalation of pressure, last night's assault, all of it logged, dated, with photographs I took on a phone I kept for exactly that purpose." Damien looked at her. He hadn't known about this. She didn't look at him. She was looking at Morse. "The pattern of harassment," Lillian continued, "combined with what Crane's real identity connects back to, closes the loop between my father's original documentation and current active operations. It's not historical, it's ongoing, and it shows that the organization has not changed its operating right now, using the same methods, still protected by the same structure." Morse picked up the drive. "Miss Harper," she said, and there was something different in her voice, now something that had not been there when she walked in. "I want you to understand something. What you're giving us today, the combination of your father's historical documentation and your own contemporaneous records, this is not a case that attorneys can pick apart on authenticity grounds. You've built something that is very difficult to challenge." Lillian said, "My father would have wanted it done right." "It's done right," Morse said quietly. Lillian looked at the table. She pressed her lips together once. Then she looked up. "What happens now?" she said. "We transmit everything to Washington today that's already arranged," Morse said. "The judicial misconduct referral goes directly to the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility, above district level. Alderman's investigation falls to the Public Integrity Section, which will coordinate with the Financial Crimes Unit. This doesn't move through local channels at any point." "How long?" Lillian asked. "Realistically, a formal action takes time. But the preliminary injunctive steps, the asset freezes, the movement restrictions, those can happen quickly once the authorization comes through. Days, not weeks, and until then," Lillian said. Morse looked at her steadily. "Until then, you should remain somewhere secure." She glanced at Damien very briefly, then back. "It appears you have that covered." After the investigators left, the house was very quiet. Damien and Lillian were alone in the sitting room. He looked at her. The second drive, he said. Yes, she said. You didn't tell me. No, why? She was quiet for a moment. Because I needed to know what kind of man you were before I told you everything, she said. I needed to watch you operate. Watch how you handled the bank, the investigators, the decisions you made about Crane, about Washington. She paused. I needed to verify. He held her gaze and he said, You were exactly what I needed you to be, she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, You have been the most careful person I have ever met. Careful kept me alive, she said. It did, he agreed. But Lillian, he stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked back at her. You can stop being careful now. With me. The room was completely silent. She looked at him for a long time. Then, for the first time since the night he had found her in the snow, she let something all the way through. Not a performance of composure, not the controlled steadiness she used as armor, but something real and unmanaged and tired and relieved all at once. Her eyes filled. She didn't look away, she let him see it. I'm so tired, she said, just that, 3 words. I know, he said. 4 years is a very long time to be alone, it is. I don't know how to stop, she said. I don't know how to just stop running and stop calculating and stop waiting for the next thing to go wrong. You don't have to know how to stop immediately, he said. You just have to stop today. Just today. She pressed one hand over her eyes for a moment, 1 second too, and pulled it back. When she lowered it, her eyes were wet, but her face was steady. Your world, she said. The things you do. The people you are to the outside. I'm not naive about what that is. No, he said. You're not. And I'm not asking you to be something you're not, she said. I just need to understand, what does it mean? That you're helping me. That you've done all of this. What does it mean to you? He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who answered questions like this easily. He was not a man who had been asked questions like this often. The people in his life operated on terms that didn't require this kind of honesty, on agreements, on mutual benefit, on the clean transactional certainty of his world. But she was asking, and she had earned an honest answer. It means, he said carefully, that I found someone who needed protecting and I chose to protect her. And the longer I've known her, the more clearly I understand that protection isn't really what she needed. He paused. What she needed was someone standing beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. She looked at him. There's a difference, she said. There's a significant difference, he agreed. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I've been thinking about what my father wrote. About trusting someone who protects people when nobody is watching. She met his eyes. He meant someone with integrity. He meant someone whose character didn't change based on who was watching or what they could get from it. I know what he meant, Damien said. You sat outside my door all night, she said. The kitchen staff told me. You sat there until sunrise, and then you went to your study and started building a plan to protect a woman you didn't know, who had brought an enormous amount of danger into your house. You didn't bring it, he said. It was brought to you. Damien, she said. He waited. Why, she said. Of all the decisions you could have made. Of all the ways a man in your position could have handled finding a maid unconscious in the snow, why this? Why all of this? He looked at her. He thought about the answer carefully. Because I recognized something, he said finally. When I carried you inside and I saw your face in the light, I recognized what I was looking at. Someone who had been surviving alone for a very long time. Someone who had learned to make themselves small enough to be invisible because being invisible was safer than being seen. He paused. I spent the first 15 years of my life doing the same thing. Before the empire, before the reputation, before any of it, I was a boy in a very difficult world who learned that the safest place was the place nobody looked. She was very still. I looked, he said simply, that's all. The room held that for a moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. It was Marcus. He picked up. Tell me. Marcus said, Alderman just filed an emergency civil motion to suppress claiming privileged financial documentation has been obtained through improper means. He named you. He named Lillian. He's going public with it. Damien stood. His attorneys filed it 20 minutes ago, Marcus continued. It's been leaked to 2 financial news outlets already. They're calling it an attempt by organized crime to fabricate evidence against a respected financier. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. He understood immediately. Alderman had known the files would reach Washington. He couldn't stop the transmission, it was too late for that. So he was doing the next best thing, poisoning the well publicly. If he could associate the evidence with Damien Valenti's name, with organized crime before the investigation was formally announced, he created reasonable doubt in the public narrative before the facts were even aired. He was burning the field so nothing could grow. "How serious is the suppression motion?" Damien said. "Our attorney says it has no merit at the federal level. The DOJ received the materials directly from the original source and chain of custody is clean. But it creates noise, and noise creates delay." "He wants delay," Damien said. "He wants the regulatory review timeline to slip." "That's my read," Marcus said. Damien thought fast. "Call our attorney. I want a statement ready within the hour, factual, clean, no emotional language. It should address the chain of custody directly and reference the DOJ intake confirmation. I want it in the hands of every outlet that Alderman just contacted before the end of the business day." He ended the call. He looked at Lillian. She had heard enough. She said, "He's going public. He's trying to make this about me," Damien said. "About my name. He wants people to hear Valenti and evidence in the same sentence and discount everything that follows." "Will it work?" she said. "It will create noise," he said. "It won't change what was received in Washington this afternoon. It won't change your father's documentation. It won't change what Crane did in this house, or what Alderman built over 15 years. He paused. "But it changes the public story, and public story matters when you're trying to reach a jury." She said, "Then we correct the public story." He looked at her. "I'll speak," she said. "To the press. Not now, not today, but when the time is right. When the investigation is far enough along, that the facts are public and established. I'll tell my father's story, my name, my face, my voice." She held his gaze. "He wanted to use your name to discredit the evidence." "My father's name discredits nothing." Damien was quiet. "That's a significant decision," he said. "I've been hiding for 4 years," she said. "I'm finished with hiding." And there was something in her voice when she said it, not anger, not bravado, but the particular quiet certainty of someone who has made a decision that is completely final. "Alderman built his whole strategy on the assumption that I would keep running. Every step he's taken has been designed for someone who is afraid to be seen." She looked at Damien. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He looked at her, this woman, who had come into his house as a ghost, as a shadow, as someone who had learned to be invisible for so long that she had nearly stopped existing, and he saw in her face what he could only describe as the return of someone who had been absent for 4 years. Not just Lillian Harper surviving, Lillian Harper deciding. "All right," he said. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it. A message from Enzo. "Crane left the West Loop building 2 hours ago. He hasn't gone back to the motel in Cicero. Current location unknown." Damien read the message twice. Crane was loose. Crane was scared, and he had been inside Alderman's office while Alderman was formulating a desperation move, and now Crane had disappeared. That was not a reassuring combination. He looked up. Lillian was watching him read the message. She could see from his face that something had shifted. "What is it?" she said. He made a decision in that moment, the decision to tell her, to keep her inside the information, rather than managed away from it. Because she had spent 4 years being the only person who knew everything, and she had earned the right to continue knowing everything. "Crane is missing," he said. "He left Alderman's building, and hasn't been located since." She processed this. "He's either running," she said, "or Alderman decided he was a liability." Damien said nothing. She said very quietly, "If Alderman decided Crane knew too much, then Crane is in significant danger," Damien said. "Yes." She looked at him. "We should find him before Alderman does," she said. "That's already in motion," he said. "Enzo's people are looking." She nodded. Then she said something that surprised him. "If Crane is found, if he's willing to talk, I'll speak to him myself." Damien looked at her. "Why? Because he spent 8 weeks in this house, pretending to be someone else so he could hurt me," she said. "And I want him to look at me and understand that it didn't work. That everything he was sent here to prevent is happening anyway." She paused. And because sometimes the only person who can make someone choose the right side is someone they've already wronged. Damien looked at her for a long moment. "You'd offer him something," he said, "in exchange for testimony." "I'd offer him the same thing I've been looking for 4 years," she said. A way out of a situation that only gets worse the longer he stays in it. He thought about that. It was, he realized, a better strategy than anything he'd been considering for Crane. Not because it was softer, but because it was real. "All right," he said. "If Enzo finds him, I'll bring you in." She nodded. Outside it was getting dark. The winter evening was pressing against the estate's windows, cold and close. Somewhere in the city, a scared man named Peter Crane was making the most important decision of his life without knowing it. Somewhere in Washington, 2 investigators were transmitting 4 years of a dead man's careful work into the hands of people who could finally use it. Somewhere, Jeffrey Alderman was making desperate moves, with the particular furious energy of a man who can feel the ground shifting beneath him. And inside the Valenti estate, in a room that had been cold for a very long time, 2 people sat with the specific closeness of those who have been through something real together and find themselves changed by it in ways they are only beginning to understand. Lillian said quietly, without looking at him, "I don't know what comes next. After all of this is over, I don't know what my life looks like." "Neither do I," Damien said honestly. She looked at him then. He looked back, he said, "But, for the first time in a long time, I find that I want to know." The house was quiet around them, and the night settled in. Enzo's people found Peter Crane at 11:17 that night. Not at a motel, not at an airport, not at any of the locations a man planning a clean exit would choose. They found him at a 24-hour diner on the south side of Chicago, sitting alone in a corner booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, staring at the table with the expression of a man who had already made a decision and was waiting for the consequences to arrive. When Marcus relayed the location, Damien looked at Lillian. "You said you wanted to speak to him." He said yes, she said. No hesitation. "It's late. You've had a long 2 days." "It can wait until morning." "It cannot wait until morning," she said. "If Alderman realizes Crane is sitting alone in a diner on the south side instead of gone or handled, he'll send someone. We have a window right now." Tonight, she was right. He knew she was right. They went. Rourke drove. Marcus came. 2 additional men covered the exterior of the diner when they arrived. Damien went in first, scanned the room in 3 seconds, identified Crane in the corner booth, and then stepped aside to let Lillian walk in ahead of him. He watched Crane see her. The man's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: shock, then guilt, then fear, then something more complicated that Damien didn't have an exact name for. The look of someone confronted by the specific reality of what they've done, embodied, walking toward them across a diner floor. Lillian sat down across from him. Damien sat at the adjacent booth, close enough to intervene, far enough to give her the room she'd asked for. Crane said nothing. He was looking at the bruising on her face, his bruising, his work, the evidence of what he'd done, and he looked like a man trying to find somewhere inside himself to put that and failing. Lillian said, "I'm not here to threaten you." Crane said nothing. "I'm not here to make you feel worse than you already feel," she said. "Though I imagine that's a low bar right now," Crane said quietly. "I didn't know it would go that far." "Yes, you did," she said, not angrily, just factually. "You knew exactly what you were there to do. But that's not what I want to talk about." He looked at her, really looked at her. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to make a choice," she said. "The same choice my father tried to make 4 years ago, before anyone gave him the chance." She leaned forward slightly. "The difference between you and my father is that you still have time." Crane's jaw tightened. "You don't know what Alderman is." "I know exactly what Alderman is," she said. "I've spent 4 years knowing. And I know what happens to people who are connected to him when those connections become inconvenient." She paused. "You went to his office today. You came out afraid. And then you came here instead of running, which tells me you're not sure running is safe anymore." Crane said nothing. "He's cleaning house," Lillian said quietly. "You know it and I know it. The question is whether you're going to wait for that to happen, or whether you're going to walk out of this situation on your own terms while there are still terms available." Crane's hands were flat on the table. He looked at them. "What exactly are you offering?" Lillian looked at Damien. Damien said, from the adjacent booth, without turning around, "Cooperation with federal investigators in exchange for a negotiated agreement. Your testimony fills in the operational gaps, current activities, current methods, personnel involved, since your father's documentation ends. You become a federal witness." Alderman loses his best argument that the evidence is old and outdated. He paused. "You don't spend the next 20 years being someone who helped Jeffrey Alderman. You spend it being someone who helped stop him." Crane was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "He'll know. The minute I walk into a federal building." "You won't walk into a federal building," Damien said. "The investigators come to you tonight, in a location I control. Alderman won't know until the agreement is already signed and transmitted." Another long silence. Crane looked at Lillian. "Your father," he said. "I didn't," he stopped. "I wasn't involved in what happened to your father. I need you to know that." Lillian looked at him steadily. "I believe you," she said, "but you were involved in what happened to me. And the only way that means anything is if you do something with it now." He looked at the table. He looked at his untouched coffee. He said, "Make the call." The federal investigators came to the estate at 1 in the morning. Agent Morse, who had clearly been waiting for exactly this possibility, arrived within 30 minutes of Damien's call. She brought her partner and a DOJ attorney who had been on standby since the afternoon meeting. Crane was cooperative in the way that frightened men are cooperative completely, exhaustively, with the specificity of someone who had been carrying information he didn't know what to do with and was enormously relieved to put it down. He gave them names, dates, operational details that connected Alderman's current activities to the historical documentation in Robert Harper's files with the precision of a bridge that had been missing its center span for 4 years and was now complete. He described the structure of Alderman's active laundering network, the current shell companies, the method by which the judge's involvement had been maintained through the second and third funding cycles. He described, specifically and without being asked, the order that had been given regarding Lillian Harper. Not just to find the files, to ensure, once the files were located, that she could not present them. Morse's expression didn't change, but she wrote it down very carefully. By 3 in the morning, Crane had signed a preliminary cooperation agreement, and his formal deposition was scheduled for the following morning under secure conditions. When the investigators finally left, Damien stood in the hallway outside the room where the meeting had taken place. Lillian came and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "It's really happening." "It's happening," he said. She put one hand briefly against the wall, like someone checking that something solid was there. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart," she said. "I've been waiting for that for 4 years. Every time something looked like it might move, it fell apart." "It's not falling apart," he said. She looked at him. "How are you so certain?" "Because I know what a losing position looks like," he said. "Alderman is in one. He moved too fast, made too many mistakes in 72 hours, and now he has a former operative giving federal testimony and a public suppression motion that's going to look like exactly what it is when the DOJ announces the investigation." He paused. "Men like Alderman win by being invisible. He's not invisible anymore." She held his gaze. Then she said, "Thank you. For all of it." "You did most of it," he said. "You built the case. You kept it alive for 4 years. You made the decision to trust someone. All I did was make sure the door was open when you were ready to walk through it." She shook her head slightly. "You did more than that." He didn't argue. "Go sleep," he said. "For the first time in 4 years, nothing is going to happen tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something neither of them had expected. She reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm. Just that, just one moment, warm and real, and then she turned and went upstairs. Damien stood in the hallway. He looked at the place where she'd touched his arm. He stood there for a long time. 3 weeks later, the Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into Jeffrey Alderman and affiliated financial entities on charges including money laundering, securities fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The announcement named a federal judge as a subject of a parallel investigation by the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility. The judge was suspended from his bench the same day. Alderman's attorneys issued a statement calling the investigation politically motivated. It was published in 2 financial newspapers and largely ignored, because on the same day, the DOJ's announcement referenced the existence of 14 years of detailed financial documentation described as thorough, independently verified, and voluntarily submitted by a cooperating witness, and the statement from a second cooperating witness, whose testimony corroborated the documentation in specific operational detail. The suppression motion Alderman had filed collapsed within 48 hours. The chain of custody on Robert Harper's files was clean. The DOJ had received the materials directly from the source. There was nothing to suppress. Damien read the announcement in his study. He called Lillian, who was in the east wing of the house she had moved from the guest room to one of the more permanent rooms 3 weeks ago, not because anyone had formally suggested it, but because it had simply stopped making sense for her to be anywhere else. "Did you see?" he said when she answered. "I saw," she said. A pause. "How do you feel?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I feel like something that has been wrong for a very long time just got told the truth," she said. "And I don't know what to do with the quiet that comes after that." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the strangest part." 2 weeks after the announcement, Lillian kept the promise she had made in the sitting room. She spoke to the press. Not to a single outlet, to a conference of journalists organized through a public interest law firm that had been following the Alderman investigation since the announcement. She sat at a table with no notes in front of her, and she told her father's story. She told it from the beginning, from the Tuesday morning phone call at noon that never came again, from the 2 lawyers who disappeared from her case, from the 3 weeks in short-term rentals, from the decision to become invisible, from 2 years and 3 months of living inside a stranger's house, walking his hallways, preparing his coffee, being the person nobody looked at. She told it without drama, without performance, in the same careful, measured, economical way she spoke when she had nothing to prove and everything to say. When she described the night she'd been found in the snow, she did not name Damien directly. She said only, "Someone found me who didn't have to. Someone who could have driven past and chosen not to look." He looked. There were 40 journalists in that room. By the evening, there were 40 million people who had read some version of what she said. The headline that appeared most frequently was not about Alderman, not about the judge, not about the investigation. It was the daughter who kept her father's truth alive for 4 years. Damien read it on his phone, alone in his study, at 9:30 that evening. He sat with it for a long time. Then he put the phone down and went to find her. She was in the kitchen again, the same small table, the same window, the same way she sat with both hands around a cup. But everything else was different. The way she held her shoulders. The way her face looked when she wasn't calculating anything. The way she looked up when he came in, not with the guarded measurement of a woman deciding how much to reveal, but with something open and unhurried that was still new enough to notice. 40 million, he said. She looked faintly embarrassed. "I wasn't counting. Someone was," he said. He sat down across from her. "You said you'd speak when the time was right. You were right about the timing." "It needed to be his story," she said. "My father's. Not mine, not yours, not Alderman's, just what one honest man did and what it cost him and why it mattered." She looked at her coffee. "I think people needed to hear that it mattered." "It mattered," Damien said. She looked at him. "There's something I want to say to you," she said. "I've been trying to find the right words for a few weeks, and I don't think I'm going to find better ones, so I'm just going to say it." He waited. "I came into your house to hide," she said. "I chose it because I thought your name would keep me safe at a distance. I never intended to know you. I never intended for any of this." She held his gaze. "And I need you to know that the person I was 5 weeks ago, the person who calculated every interaction, who never let anyone close, who had decided that trusting people was a luxury she couldn't afford, that person is gone. And it's because of you." Damien said nothing. "Not because you protected me," she said. "Though you did. Because you saw me. The whole time. From the first night, from the hallway chair, from the breakfast table. You kept seeing me even when I was trying to stay invisible." She paused. "Nobody has done that in 4 years. I forgot what it felt like." He looked at her. He thought about the walls he had built over 30 years. He thought about the particular loneliness of a man who is powerful enough that everyone around him is always performing something: deference, loyalty, fear, and who has spent so long in that world that he forgot what it meant to be in a room with someone who was simply present. She had been present from the first morning at the breakfast table. Guarded and careful and impossible to read, and completely, entirely present. "You want to know what I saw?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Someone who had every reason to fall apart and hadn't," he said. "Someone who had been running alone for so long that she'd forgotten she was still fighting. Someone who carried her father's work like a debt she owed the world, when really it was a gift she was keeping safe until the world was ready to receive it." He paused. "And someone who, even when she was afraid, never once stopped being exactly who she was." The kitchen was very quiet. Lillian Harper looked at Damien Valenti across a small table in his kitchen, in the house where she had been invisible for 2 years and seen for 5 weeks, and she felt something she hadn't felt since the last Tuesday her father called at noon. Safe. Completely, finally, without qualification. Safe. "I don't know what I'm doing next," she said. "I don't know where I go from here. I have a life to rebuild, and I don't know what shape it takes." "You don't have to know the shape yet," he said. "I know," she said. "But I want to know one thing." She looked at him steadily. "Are you in it?" He looked back at her. This was the question he had not let himself ask. The one he had been standing at the edge of for 5 weeks, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer was significant, and he was a man who did not give significant answers carelessly. He gave it now. "Yes," he said, simply, completely. "Yes." She nodded once, and then she smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. A real one, not the professional warmth she'd used at the bank, not the almost smile he'd caught glimpses of across difficult conversations. A real one, unplanned, arriving on her face like something that had been waiting for permission. He found that it was the most significant thing he had seen in 30 years of seeing significant things. In the months that followed, the Alderman case moved through the federal system with a particular momentum of something that has too much evidence and too much documentation to be stopped. Jeffrey Alderman was indicted on 11 counts. His legal team was formidable. The process was slow, but Robert Harper's files were comprehensive, Crane's testimony was specific, and the independent financial forensics that the DOJ commissioned confirmed every major finding in the original documentation. The judge resigned from the bench before his own proceedings concluded. He issued a statement through his attorney that contained no admission of guilt and convinced no one. Claremont Domestic Services, the staffing agency, was dissolved. Its ownership structure was exposed in court filings and received significant coverage. Elena Marsh, the household staff member who had been feeding information to Alderman's network, cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. She received 2 years of probation. She never returned to the Valenti estate. Peter Crane testified for 4 days. He was by all accounts a thorough and specific witness. Under the cooperation agreement, he received a reduced sentence and was relocated under federal protection. Whether that chapter of his life constituted justice or merely consequence depended on who was doing the measuring. Damien Valenti's name appeared in the press throughout the investigation, sometimes in ways that were accurate, sometimes in ways that were not. He declined to comment on any of it. He continued to run his operations, which continued to be what they had always been, and he paid no attention to the portions of his public story that were being rewritten by people who had not been there. The one comment he ever made, in a brief exchange with a journalist who caught him outside a business meeting, was this: "Miss Harper's father did something very difficult alone. She finished it alone. I was there at the end. That's all." The journalist printed it verbatim. Robert Harper's name was formally submitted, through the Public Integrity Section's recommendation, to be included in a Department of Justice Commission for civilian contributions to financial justice. The process moved slowly, the way formal recognitions always do. But it moved. Lillian received the notification on a Tuesday. She was in the east wing of the Valenti estate, at a desk she had claimed near the window, working on something she had started 2 months ago, a detailed, public account of her father's methodology and findings, written not as a legal document but as a story. A true one. The kind that other people like her father, people with conscience and evidence and nowhere safe to bring it, might read and know that there was a way through. She read the notification twice. She put the phone down. She pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called Damien. He answered on the second ring. "My father," she said. "They're going to recognize him officially." A pause. "Then he deserves it." "Yes," she said, "he does." Her voice held. "Almost." "He really does," Damien said quietly. "He'd be proud of you." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady and certain and full of something that 4 years of running had not been able to take from her, and 5 weeks of being found had given back completely. "I know," she said. "I know he would." The estate changed in the months that followed in ways that were small enough individually to overlook, but significant enough together to be undeniable. The kitchen staff noticed that Damien ate meals at actual meal times instead of at his desk. The household staff noticed that doors that had always been closed were sometimes open. Marcus noticed that his employer laughed more than once in a single week, which had previously been a quarterly occurrence. Lillian noticed that she had stopped calculating the fastest route out of any room she entered. Damien noticed that he had stopped assuming every situation would eventually require him to handle it alone. What had happened between them did not have a clean shape or a formal declaration. It had grown the way real things grow gradually, without announcement, from the specific shared weight of having been through something real together and discovering that you wanted to keep being in the same room when it was over. She was not the woman everyone had overlooked. She was the woman who had outlasted everyone who had tried to make her disappear, who had carried her father's truth through 4 years of silence and fear and isolation, and brought it, intact and unbroken, to the people who could use it. And he was not only the man everyone feared. He was the man who had stopped his car on a cold night on a North Garden path and chosen to look at something most people would have driven past. That choice had cost him nothing he was unwilling to spend. And it had given him the one thing that 30 years of building an empire had not. Someone who saw him back. Not the power, not the name, not the reputation that preceded him into every room. Him, the boy who had learned to survive by being invisible, who had built the empire as the opposite of invisibility, who had spent 30 years being the most seen man in any room and the most alone. She saw him. He had not understood until she did how much he had needed exactly that. On the last Tuesday of February, Lillian sat at her desk near the window in the East Wing and finished the final page of what she had been writing. She read it through once. Then she did something her father had always done when he finished something important. He had put it in a drawer for 24 hours before deciding if it was ready. He had said that important things needed to sit before you knew if they were true. She put it in the desk drawer. She closed the drawer. She stood up and walked to the window. Chicago in late winter, still gray, still cold, but with the particular quality of light that comes in late February, when the season is not yet done but has begun very quietly to consider relenting. Damien came to the doorway behind her. She heard him. She didn't turn around immediately. "How does it feel?" he said. He had known she was finishing it today. She turned then. "Like the beginning of something," she said. "Not the end." He looked at her. "Good," he said. She looked at the man in the doorway, the most feared man in northern Chicago, who had sat in a hallway chair all night for a woman he didn't know, who had made one phone call that had cost him a 20-year debt, who had sat across a breakfast table and listened, and then said, "You don't have to be alone anymore." She thought about her father. She thought about Tuesday phone calls at noon. She thought about the long, cold, lonely years between then and now. And she thought about the night in the snow and the security light, and a man who had been on his way home to his empty house, who had looked out a car window and stopped. Who had looked. Just that. Just looked. And because he had looked, Robert Harper's truth had finally reached the light. And because he had looked, a woman who had been running for 4 years had finally stopped. And because he had looked, the coldest house in Chicago was warm. "Come have coffee," Damien said from the doorway. She picked up her phone from the desk. She walked toward him, and the woman who had been left alone in the snow, the woman everyone had overlooked, the woman who had carried the weight of the truth when no one else would, the woman who had survived everything that powerful men had thrown at her and come through it with her father's evidence intact and her own self unbroken, walked out of that room and into the rest of her life. Not running, not hiding, not invisible, just herself finally, completely in a house that had learned to be a home, beside a man who had learned to be known, in a city that would remember her name. Because the woman left alone in the snow had not needed to be rescued. She had needed to be seen, and everything else, every consequence, every exposed truth, every powerful man brought low, every justice finally served had followed from that one simple, irreversible act. Someone looked, and nothing was ever the same again.